Okay, so welcome to the Deep Dive Series webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Eric Karstens, and I'm the Program Manager at Bowsea Ocean Awareness Programs. Today, we're really excited to hear from Em and Kevin Barrett of The Inspirer, which is a solutions-focused news site that highlights the people fighting to make change. But before we jump into that, I'd like to give an introduction to Bowsea Ocean Awareness Programs for any newcomers. So we are a Massachusetts-based nonprofit that engages young people in environmental advocacy through art. Our flagship program is the Ocean Awareness Contest, which invites young people around the world to create visual art, poetry, spoken word, creative writing, film, music, dance, interactive, and multimedia submissions on a variety of issues that our oceans are facing. The contest is totally free to enter and open for students worldwide between the ages of 11 and 18 years old. We have cash awards of up to $1,500, including some special awards, like the Voice of the Sea Award for any student who submits spoken word poetry to the contest. The We All Rise Prize, which is for students in the US who self-identify as Black, Indigenous, and Latine. And we have some special awards for students in our home state of Massachusetts as well. Now, each year we do have a specific theme for the contest, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Akila Ben-Laura, who is a Bowsea alum, a former Future Blue Youth Council member with us, and a current Bowsea intern to give a little bit more context about our 2023 theme.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. Like Eric mentioned, I'm Akila. I'm a Bowsea alum. I've been here for so long, since I was probably like 13 or 14, which is a really long time. And like Eric mentioned, I helped with the formation of the contest theme alongside all the wonderful people at Bowsea. We created a climate hero resource page on the website to help young people who are thinking of applying for the contest gain some inspiration and source some inspiration. And some of the most recent work I've helped with also includes helping out with the Bowsea's Future Blue Youth Council in its formation and also serving in the first year. And I think that was sort of the starting point of where this theme emerged from. Linda and I started having, Linda, who's the founder of Bowsea, we started having conversations about how the Future Blue Youth Council is a space that's centered on joy and hope in friendship and in climate spaces that kind of tends to be a little bit rare. And kind of thinking like forward with that, we wanted to create a theme that really centered joy and action and hope, and also just like celebration of all the good work that's happening, because there are so many climate heroes in our community, in the world, in ourselves. And that's a little bit about where the theme started and where it's going. And I'm really excited today to hear from Em and Kevin about their work and how they're also climate heroes in their own right.
All right, thank you so much, Akila. And that is the perfect segue to introduce our two speakers today, who are calling in from Paris. So Em and Kevin Barrett are the founders of the news site, The Inspirer. Before The Inspirer, Kevin worked as a managing partner of an HR consultancy, and Em comes from the field of social anthropology, where they engaged a lot with intersectional justice. They consume a lot of news, and they struggle to find hopeful stories, much like Akila was saying, in this kind of sea of doom and gloom. So they were thinking that there must be somebody out there somewhere who's doing something constructive. So together they created The Inspirer to report on people working to make change in the world. They believe that by sharing these change-making stories, people will see what's possible and be inspired to contribute to creating safer and healthier communities on all levels. So with that, please give a warm welcome to Kevin and Em.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Akila, and thank you, Eric. Really, that was very nice. We're really happy to be here with you now to talk about solutions journalism and the 2023 Ocean Awareness Contest and climate heroes in action. What we've done is we've prepared some comments to present a couple of themes that we'd like to show you. And then afterwards, we've reserved some time, a lot of time, for some Q&A, so we can discuss some of the themes that more in depth. So we wanted to talk about the news, and then shift to the news in our brains and how the impact that the news has on us. We want to talk about solutions journalism, which is the theme of the talk, and then so just a couple of real life heroes that we wanted to talk to you about, some of the people we've interviewed, some of the inspirers that we've been talking with, and then we'll be able to move over to some Q&A and some discussion. But before we do that, before we get into the news, one of the things we wanted to do is we just wanted to check in briefly with you, because we want to talk to you about something that we all do every day. We all, at some point, check the news. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to check in with you and see how you feel when you check the news. So if you could just take a second and use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to let us know on a scale of 1 to 10. You see the smileys there. Or you can also, if you want to type in a word or a short phrase, and just tell us, when you think about the news and the state of the world, how does that make you feel right now? Not in general, but just right now, when you're thinking of the state of the world and the news, where are you at? We'll take a couple of seconds for that.
So you've got some answers already. It's like 3.5 to 3.5.
3, 4, 2. Okay, well, we never know what the results are going to be, but I guess one thing we could say is it seems that all the results are at 5 or less, which you see what the smiley faces look like. So it gives you an idea of in general how a lot of people feel when we think of the state of the world and what the news has to tell us about the state of the world. So what we want to do is we'll start off with a brief overview of the news, and maybe Em, you can take that part and then we'll take it from there.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. And thank you, Eric and Akila, for your introduction as well. I want to start talking to you a little bit about the news, and specifically about how the news has evolved through history and how it works today. So let's start from the beginning. Once upon a time, the news we only got our news from newspapers, and the paper was the first method of broadcasting news. But around the 20th century, that's when radio and TV came along, and so that diversified a little bit about the methods of how we can get the news. And it was only in 1980 that the first 24-hour broadcasting TV channels happened. So that's not even that long ago that we were starting to get like a very constant flux of news. However, you always had to go somewhere physically to get it. So, whether it was at home on your couch, you light your TV and watch the news there, or in your car and you listen to the radio, or, you go out and buy your newspaper. So you really had to go and physically get the news. You had to go somewhere to get it. But at the turn of the century, so, 22 years ago, everything changed. So, it may seem that connected technology has been around forever, or, for me at least, it feels like it has, but Facebook only really took off around 2007, sorry. And the iPhone 2 came out in 2008. So that's less than 20 years ago. And with the birth of social media and smartphones, the news became accessible at all times in our pockets. And that inherently is not a bad thing. Having better access to knowledge and about what's going on in the world really helps us shape our opinions, and and helps us to take decisions about actions we want to take as citizens in this world. So, and these are all things that we didn't really have access to before those social media and smartphones. But the more complicated thing in that story is that the change of distribution of the news also brought along a change in revenue model. So people weren't going out to buy newspapers anymore, and they weren't getting subscriptions as much. And so a lot of the information was circulating for free, especially with, social media and sharing and everything. And so in order to generate revenue, media outlets also had to change their business model. And so, as you might know, for-profit online news really became all about traffic, clicks, and user data. So, excuse me, to satisfy advertisers and generate the data that they need to sell, media outlets really needed to increase their traffic, collect clicks and data. And that's when we really started to see an influx of more and more sensationalist news. And most of the stories that we're seeing are really problem-based. And that led to something looking a little bit like this. So these are a couple headlines that we taken screenshots of. And actually, we made this slide back in, at the beginning of this summer. And all of the headlines are still relevant today. And this kind of says something, they're quite alarming. They're very quite stressful. So yeah, economy on the brink, that's something that we can still relate to today. But these are all things that are, very sensationalist and alarmist. And so we asked ourselves why. And so we found that news providers really are looking to create an addictive user experience, and using those sensationalist headlines and storytelling generates emotions of alarm, anxiety, horror, and dread. These are all very strong emotions. And I don't know if you've heard the expression, like, if it's free, then you're the product. When we're getting pinged all of these stories all day long, what happens is that we need to get more. We're always going back to the platform and need to know what's happening, what's going to happen next. So basically, we're being bombarded all day, every day by the same seemingly impossible to change problems, things like climate change, poverty, injustice, violence, and we kind of I end up feeling like this, and I also feel like there's nothing I can do. And so this leads to a lot of news avoidance. So that's like a big phenomenon that's happening in the last couple of years. So the Reuters Institute actually did research on that. Every year they do research on the news, and they go and explore all around the world. And one of the findings that they found was that the proportion of news consumers who say they avoid news, whether that's often or sometimes, has increased sharply across countries, with many respondents saying that news has a negative effect on their moods. And to give you an example of this type of selective news avoidance has doubled in both Brazil by 54% and in the UK by 46% in the last 5 years. So a lot of people are switching off. All right, so we looked a little bit about how the news works. And we wanted to also zoom in a little bit more about what is the effect on us as individuals. And Kevin will speak to you a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah, so real briefly, Em, you just covered a lot of ground, but I'd like to focus on, I'd say, one key takeaway in all that, in the evolution of the news is, for the first time in history, we benefit from incredible access to information. Now, you know this, but this is what we're seeing now is more than 24/7 access. It's really unlimited access to information and news, which has some consequences. Almost all the information we get comes to us visually in the form of images, headlines, stories. But there's so much news that the news media, the media outlets need to compete to catch our attention. So the news gets packaged, and it gets packaged using very graphic images, and also, like you said, attention-grabbing headlines, headlines that are sensationalist, which was always the case in the news to begin with, but we're seeing that become more aggravated. And to grab our attention, the headlines are either sensationalist or problem focused, like you just mentioned them. And why problem focused? It's because the way we work, our brains work. When we see a problem, we want to know more. We need to know more. We want to know if there's something we need to do facing this problem. And we also need to know if we need to avoid danger or protect ourselves, or how to react. So while it's perfectly valid and important for the news to inform us about the problems we're facing, either individually or in our communities, At the same time, with the evolution of the news, there's something fundamentally problematic about the quantity of problem-focused news that we're now receiving every day. We really are being deluged with problems. And being deluged with problems is problematic because of some of the funny quirks in the way our brain works. For one of those quirks has to do with memory. And for some reason, evolution has decided that it's important for human beings to be able to remember things. And I mean, that's pretty simple. What we see, we remember. So far, so good, right? You know, we all know this. But I'd like to give you a simple example of how visual memory works and how it can become problematic if we're concentrating too much on negative news stories. So let's go. If you've been looking at this screen as I've been explaining this, you've been seeing an image of a rainbow-colored elephant. It's paisley designed. You see big ears in it, legs and a trunk, and maybe you see the tusks. Some people see eyes. I'd like you to take a good look at this elephant. If you haven't been looking at your screen while you're listening to us, if you're in the kitchen doing the dishes or something like that, just take a second and look at the screen, because I want you to get a good look at this elephant. Look at its shape and the colors, and everything you can about it, because in a second, the elephant's going to disappear. We're going to take it away. Okay, so blank screen.
Bye-bye.
In a second, I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to do two things, actually. One is going to be to close your eyes. And the second thing is I want you to focus on just one thing, which is going to be forgetting the elephant that you've just seen. So I want you to focus on that. We'll do it for 10 seconds. I'll do the countdown so you know where we're at if your eyes are closed. So if you can just do that, close your eyes now for 10 seconds and do whatever it takes, do whatever's in your whatever's possible, but to forget that you've just seen this elephant, okay? So we'll count it off here. That's 5 seconds, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I think that should probably be enough. The 10 seconds are up, and I'm interested. I really want to know, how did that go for you? Were you able to forget the elephant? So again, if you can go back to the bottom of the screen, there's the raised hand function. I'd like to hear from everybody. If we could start off with the people who tried to see the elephant, tried to forget the elephant, but continue to see images of an elephant or flashes of color or shapes. Could you just raise your hand so I get an idea of who tried to forget the elephant, but nonetheless continue to see the elephant? Did that happen with anybody? Okay, so we have, well, 5. Okay, so 5 people, which out there that saw the elephant, no longer saw it, and tried to forget it, and nonetheless continue to see something about the elephant. And I'd also like to hear about the people, those of you who tried to forget you saw the elephant and were actually able to unsee the elephant. Could you raise your hand now? So we see who was able to unsee what you'd seen. Okay, that's 2 people. So, so there were twice as many people who were unable to unsee, I can say, the elephant than those who were able. So, in other words, more people who tried to forget they saw the elephant, but nonetheless continue to see the elephant. Now, let me reassure you, whether or not there's nothing, it's all good. Whether or not you're able to unsee the elephant, it's completely normal. We all have different brains, and our brains work differently when it comes to short-term memory. So there's no right answer or wrong answer to this. But I think you can start to see something that we're trying to illustrate here. You can start to see how difficult it is to unsee something that you've seen, for some people at least. And while this isn't important if the image is something as insignificant as a rainbow-colored elephant, I think you can start to see why it might be more problematic if the image is something more like a negative news story, something that's repeated over and over during the day, something that is associated with images that might be more stronger than a rainbow-colored elephant. And this is how the press reports, and this is how the social media shares the news. And particularly on a subject like climate change. Now, over time, if our understanding about a problem of such as climate change is associated with problem-focused headlines and frightening images, well, that's going to start to color how we understand what we can do about the problem and what the solutions might be. Now, don't get me wrong, remembering things is useful, and knowing the problems that we face is useful. This is a very common reaction to solutions journalism. People say, yes, but it's important to know what's not, what the problems are. And we agree. It's very important to know what the problems are. But if you don't pay attention to the news that you screen every day, and you find yourself getting a nonstop stream of problem-focused stories, which is sort of what gets delivered on the on our screens, well, then Gandhi says a man is but the product of his thoughts, and what he thinks, or we can say what we see, we become. And if you're getting this nonstop stream of problem-focused stories, well, stories being framed as gigantic, larger than life, as you said, something that's impossible to fix, that's really going to start to impact how we see the problem, our ability to imagine a solution, like I just said. It's also going to impact what you were talking about before, our mood, our health, what you think is possible, and also how you imagine the future. So, like you said with the Reuters study, there's a growing body of polling and also a growing body of research that shows that after reading typical negative news stories, people report overwhelmingly increases in emotions and feelings such as anxiety, sadness, pessimism, giving up. And fortunately, there's an antidote to that. And that's what we're here to talk to you about. The antidote is solutions journalism. And solutions journalism is one of the, or we also say constructive journalism. It's one of the things that can counteract the effects of so much negative news. Now, one thing that makes a very big difference in the way we understand the news is the way that a story is framed. And if you look at these two headlines here, this is the same story. This is back in 2020. This is COVID. We have two prime ministers, one in the UK, one in Ireland. The Daily Mail is both the same owner, both newspapers. First headline says, "Many loved ones will die," regarding the coronavirus. And I mean, I had the effect of the tone, but the feeling is generally, gosh, this is a problem. And you start to associate, many loved ones will die. My loved ones? Whose loved ones? How will they die? We start to get a lot of negative associations with a title like that, whereas framing a story, such as it's framed in the second one, where we read together, we can save many lives. Well, framing a story is something that makes a fundamental difference in terms of how we feel about what might be possible with respect to the story. So news stories that present or suggest solutions to problems, or stories that are framed positively, like the Irish Daily Mail story, do give rise to empowerment, feelings of empowerment, and generally more positive mental states. And this is especially true regarding climate change, which is what we're here to talk about with y'all. The way that climate stories are framed actually has the power to determine whether or not we're going to act on initiatives regarding climate change. So the narratives that we hear and that we see and we read really do make a very big difference. And people who read solution stories or stories that present solutions to climate problems, well, the research is showing that it turns out that these people are way more inclined to take some sort of action, whether it's acting environmentally friendly at home, donating to charity, donating your time, voicing opinions, engaging, sharing, taking action. People are way more inclined to engage in those kinds of behaviors if they're reading stories or if you're learning about stories that are positively framed. And this is probably one of the most underreported stories in the press. And you can imagine why, that they're in the business of scary headlines. But and this is why we're so excited to talk to Bouncy about the focus you're putting on the climate heroes in action this year, and what those heroes are doing to take change, because we think it's a very, very important way of framing the story and understanding what we can do and empowering people to take action, to come together and to put our heads together and to try and do something. So this is a brief introduction. We'll shift it to solutions journalism now. We want to talk very briefly about what it is, how it works, and we're also going to talk about where you can find it, because you need to look for it right now.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take it from here and talk a little bit more about solutions journalism. Thank you, Kevin, for introducing the topic. And after all this information, I'm sure that I wouldn't be surprised if you were feeling a little like the image on the screen right now. To be honest with you, when we were starting to research all this information about the news, and we're figuring all of that, we definitely were feeling like that. And we were doing it back in 2020 when we were in lockdown. So it was a really negative news heavy time. And understanding all of this made us feel a little hopeless, not like, honestly. So it was a little difficult, but like Kevin mentioned earlier, there are different ways that we can report stories and the news that is not only better for our health, but also can drive us to action. And that's solutions journalism. So what exactly is solutions journalism? I want to get into it. So I'll start by what it's not. It's not happy news, because it's so much more than that. It's an approach to reporting the news. So it's a fast growing space within journalism. And what it's really about is that it's about giving the full picture. So it looks at a specific issue within its context and reports on what has been done or tried or what was the outcome. And the goal of this approach is to present people with a truer, more complete view of these issues. And it really helps them to drive more effective citizenship, which is one of the main things that we want to talk to you today about, how news can lead us to action. And so I can't really talk about solutions journalism without mentioning the Solutions Journalism Network, because they're doing so much work in infiltrating this new approach into newsrooms around the world. And they were founded in 2013, and they bring together over 500 news organizations and 20,000 journalists worldwide. And what they're doing is they're inspiring one another to integrate solutions journalism into their reporting, into their newsrooms. And, they've been doing some research as well. And what their research has shown is that across all demographics, audiences find solution stories more interesting, more trustworthy, more informative, and it's really changing their understanding of the issues in a way that makes them more enthusiastic in participating in civic life. So I also want to talk a little bit about how solutions journalism helps. So it helps in many, many ways. We could go on and on about it, but we've essentialized it into 4 points. So the first one is that we can see that change is possible. And if we hope to change anything in the world, and climate change included, but anything, whether it's inequality, just so many things that we could think about, is that we really need to believe in a possibility and envision a brighter future. We need to create that story. The second point is leapfrogging. So sharing solutions really also means sharing the best practices. So successful solutions that are reported on, they can be copied, they can be improved and rolled out in communities all around the world. The third thing is that also the change makers, so the people who are really implementing these solutions, the climate heroes, like we're talking here at BAUSI, is they need visibility and they need increased support. And I think it's really important that they're represented in the news. And then the fourth one is a little bit what we were talking about before, about getting a balanced perspective about what truly is happening in the world. It's really fundamental for our mental well-being, but just our well-being in general. And because we were saying before about the different feelings that can come out of reading the news. So, all right, so that's a little bit about solutions journalism, and that's definitely the approach that we've taken on in the work that we do. And so I want to give it up to Kevin as well to just introduce a little bit about our work and how we incorporate this approach in what we do.
Okay, sure. And we'll wrap it up with the Inspirer, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. I just wanted to say one thing. A couple of times we've mentioned research, and at the end of the presentation, there'll be we provide the research, we provide links to the stories or the sources that we have, and beyond that, if anybody's interested, we have a lot more that we didn't include in the presentation that we'd be happy to share with you. But to talk about the Inspire, like Eric, you said at the outset, we're a news website and now also a podcast. And we created the Inspire a little over a year or so ago, primarily because we didn't know what else to do. During COVID, back, like you mentioned, that we were locked down, there was a relentless negative news cycle. It was starting to drive us crazy. We were starting to look for sources of constructive news or news that wasn't such being repeated in a loop. And we found that it was very difficult to find the sources of these stories. Very difficult just to find these stories. There's like happy stories or happy picture stories or with dogs and puppies and things like that. We wanted stories about problems with answers, and we wanted to know what people were doing. We couldn't find them, so we decided maybe we had a role to play. Now, we know that the world really does need to find solutions to some very big intersectional problems. That's, I think we all agree that we're facing some big and interesting problems where we need to pull together and put our resources and our intelligence together to try and solve some of these problems. So we started to look around and to see what was out there. And what we found was, contrary to what we saw in the media, there were a lot of people, many people out there who were doing all sorts of things to solve the problems that we face, common problems that we face across all our societies. Now, because of the way that the media works, these stories weren't getting any bandwidth, and they were very difficult to find, like I said. So we started the Inspire because we thought that perhaps we could do something to help change that and get this message out. So we personally were very interested about talking to people who were working for change, because we thought it was important to know what people were doing. We wanted to know what people were doing individually. And we also wanted to be able to honor what they were doing. I mean, what people are doing to solve problems in their communities, they're really doing on behalf of all of us. We live in an interconnected world. And something that somebody's doing to try and make life better for people in their community necessarily impacts all of us. So we wanted to know more. And we also thought that if we shared these stories via the website, it might help other people to see what we were seeing, that transformational positive change is possible. Again, contrary to what you might see if you rely on your news feed on your cell phone to get your news. So we started investigating, we started talking to people, and we found that the stories that we were finding were stories about some qualities that are very important. We found the stories about hope and inspiration, stories of creativity, personal creativity, and courage, and perhaps more importantly, more than anything, they're stories about action. And we think that these qualities are important because this is exactly what we need to cultivate now more than ever if we're going to take on some of the problems that we need to face. So we hoped that by sharing these underreported stories on the activities of these everyday climate heroes or everyday heroes, that they would start to get more support, more acknowledgement. So we set out to talk to them, as many people as we could. We call these people inspirers, and we've spoken to roughly about 80 people since we started. And here you can see some of their faces. And one of the things they have in common is all these people have taken a decision at some point to do something to improve the lives of the people in their communities and the lives of the people beyond their communities. And the people you see in this slide hail from Singapore and South Africa, the US, Cameroon, Lebanon, England, and Canada. And like I said, it's a small sample of the people that we've been talking to. If you go on the website, this isn't a pitch for the website, but if you go on the website, you'll see all the people we've talked to and where they're from and what they're doing. But and this is might be a good point to change gears here, because maybe we could talk about one or two of the people that the real life heroes that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Where we met.
Yeah, I think it's really important, because now that after we've talked about the news and how it affects us, and how solutions journalism can help in changing the way how we think about the world and how we act in the world. And I think it's important to kind of get real and talk about real life examples of inspirers or heroes. And so I wanted to start off by talking about Ania Butler. And I'm really, really excited to talk to you about her, because she could definitely be one of those climate heroes that inspires some of the art for the 2023 Bausi contest. So Ania is a 15-year-old spoken word poet, so she's an artist herself. And she's also a leader at a youth organization called Youth versus Apocalypse. And so Youth versus Apocalypse is based in California. And it started out as a smallish group of young people who were supported by the adults in their community and in Oakland. And what they were doing is they were using direct action and lobbying to fight a proposed coal terminal in their city. And what happened was that their collective action led to the coal terminal developers to abandon the project, which was a huge victory for them. And since then, they've been building on that momentum, and they continue to expand their focus to other climate justice issues. And today they've become a really, really vocal group of young people impacting national climate conversations. So their work is, incredibly impactful, incredibly inspiring. Maybe some of you have actually heard of them before, and I felt very grateful to speak to Ania and interview her for a podcast and an interview. So yeah, that's Ania. Kevin's going to speak to you about another person that we've interviewed that we find really inspiring, but comes from a little bit of a different perspective. So go ahead, you can take that one.
Sure. So this is another person we talked to. Now, Tim Lenton is he's a professor of Earth Systems Science at the Global Systems Institute at Exeter University in England. Now, he's not an activist per se, but he's a climatologist. He's a researcher and an academic, and he's doing vital research right now about how to combat climate change. He's looking at what he calls positive tipping points. We know what tipping points are. He's looking at positive tipping points and positive social tipping points. And we recently interviewed Tim and talked to him about the work he's doing and what he sees and how he sees the future. And one of the questions we asked him, we asked him, what's the most important thing from his perspective for people like us to know about positive tipping points? And he said there's two things that you really need to know. First is there's real evidence, and he's a very serious researcher. There's scientific evidence that positive tipping points have happened and they're happening right now. So what we're doing at a societal level to decarbonize the planet is working. Another thing he's finding is it can be accelerated. You can study it, you can model it, and there's things that you can do to accelerate the positive effects of the things that we're doing right now to take down carbon. So we thought that was incredibly hopeful news. It's something that you won't read about in the press. I did not see the headlines on CNN or the BBC about Tim Lenton's work. But this is really something that's contrary to what you'd read in the mainstream. And it's, again, like I said, very hopeful. The second thing he said, and this ties into what I'm just saying, he told us that if we stand a chance of speeding things up to the degree that we need to speed them up to solve some of the problems we need to solve, evidence-based storytelling is the key. We were shocked. He says, if we're going to reach the positive tipping points that we need to reach, there's one key, and it's evidence-based storytelling. he said, we need to come together and we need to fight what he calls the nefarious forces of doom and gloom news. And he says, we got to get these stories out there. They're here, they're happening, we're doing the work, we can accelerate what we're doing, but these stories aren't being reported. So, I mean, I could go on and on about Tim, and maybe if you're interested, we talk about his work in the Q&A, or we can talk about Ania's work, what she's doing. But because I do want to make sure we leave enough time for the Q&A. But these are some of the people we've talked to, and we're just talking to them. We find the work that they're doing to be inspiring. It's, again, underreported. We want what they're doing to be known. So that's what we're trying to do at the Inspire. So, and maybe this is probably a good time just to check in with everybody and then start to wrap it up. And
yeah, so I want to kind of do, this is kind of all the information that we wanted to share with you today. And before we move to the Q&A, we wanted to do another little check-in, a little bit like we did at the beginning of the talk. So again, if you want to put on a scale of 1 to 10, how you're feeling about, the news, and how you're feeling about the state of the world after hearing these people, after hearing about solutions journalism, and how that can frame the world, the way that we look at the world a little differently. This is great. I'm seeing some really great numbers here. Got some 8s and 9s. Yeah, and I mean, this is not at all to like kind of say, well, to prove you that this is the right way of consuming news or whatnot. But I think is what's really important about is to kind of check in with ourselves and see how the information has impacted us and what is the takeaway from this conversation. It's just really for us. I mean, for me, I know at least like when I was thinking about my own personal number at the beginning of the talk, and I was as well like below 5. And then when I just remembering the stories that we just talked about, makes me feel really hopeful. We've got even a 10. That's really great. That's awesome.
But what's important, I mean, maybe in the beginning, we were the score was tended to be below 5, and now we're above 5 and way above 5.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, see what happens when we start thinking about these things a little differently. And, at the end of the day, nothing has really ultimately changed. It's just the way that we've kind of looked at it, and the different, and been in contact with a couple of stories that are maybe brought a little bit more hope to us. So that's just really exciting. It's exciting to me. And lastly, before we jump into the Q&A, I wanted to also talk about the other players in our field, solutions journalism platforms that exist all around the world and who have inspired us as well to do what we're doing. And so I'll just give a couple here. There's Squirrel News, they're based in Germany. Positive News, which are based in the UK. So Good is a French magazine. It's a paper magazine. It came out a couple of years ago. It's really exciting. In the US, there's Good, and Reasons to Be Cheerful. These are all things that you can find online as well. And they do have a lot of articles. So something that you can check in.
Well, serious news articles, really. It's not happy news. It's
no, it's solutions journalism. And, of course, there's the Solutions Journalism Network, which has like a huge library of solutions journalism articles that they compile together on their website. So definitely check that one out. And also I put Water Bear on there. I don't know if anyone heard about it. It's a free streaming platform for documentaries, a little bit like Netflix, but they've got a lot of really powerful documentaries about climate change and other topics as well, but it's definitely worth checking out. So all right, so this is it for us. We're really excited to hear what you've got to say. Thank you so much for your attention, for your ears, and yeah, we'll bring the meeting back over to Eric and Akila so that we can get into the conversations.
Thank you both so much for sharing, and it's also just great to hear from everyone else who is participating that we're all kind of in similar boats with the way that we interact with the media, and that we're all experiencing these different things. And thank you, Em and Kevin, for trying to change the media and to uplift these different stories. So we'll open the floor up. If anyone has any questions, now is a great time to ask. You can either use the chat or the raise hand feature. I can, well, I'll give people some time to type, so I'll ask a starting question. Because so much of the news is not solutions focused and doesn't feature these like people who are doing this good, how do you find people to interview for the Inspirer?
That's a good question. Do you want me to answer it?
Okay, sure, go ahead.
It's a good question because at the beginning, so first there's different platforms that we found. So there's the Goldman Prize, for example, or the Right Livelihood, which give out huge, they give out prizes once a year to people who are really acting in this space and really impacting communities on a large level. So we started looking at those and their winners and researching them. And then it's just been this really kind of like deep dive in social media and the internet and seeing who they connect with and everything, and then just doing a lot of research to find these people, because yeah, like you said, it's their stories are not really making the headlines, so it's a lot of digging.
Yeah, what's really interesting, if you take the Goldman Prize, for
Yeah.
example, which is like the Nobel Prize for the environment,
Yeah.
and they give 7 prizes, one for each continent, every year. And if you go on the social media feed of the winners, you'll see who they're in contact with.
Yeah.
And you're able to reach out. We were able to reach out very easily to everybody. One of the things that really drives me crazy is you look at some of the influencers on social media with the millions of followers that they have, and then you go on a social media account of whether it's Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, of one of the prize winners, and you'll see that they might, somebody who's very active on social media might have sort of like 3,000 or 5,000 followers,
Yeah.
and not the hundreds of thousands or the millions of followers that influence that. It's just, it seems like it's backwards to me, that people who are having, and the Goldman Prize is a very prestigious award, the people who get it are having impacts on countless lives. So it is, I mean, I recommend to go and check out their social media feeds. It's a great place to start.
Yeah, and give them support.
And give them support.
That's the main idea, is just, you know, to create more visibility around these people.
Great, thank you. I did get a message, a question in a message, so I'll read it out. It seems like one of the pluses, in quotes, of the COVID shutdown was the improvement in air quality in multiple places in the world. One would have hoped that the positive news might have given some incentive to continue this trend. But once things opened back up, the news was not only that air quality had reverted, but in fact was even worse than pre-shutdown. So is this backsliding common with the solutions, and how would you combat that?
Maybe I'll start with that one. I think one of the things that's, I mean, is a very poignant. I think we're both shaking our heads saying yes. The way that the reporting was on some of the changes we saw during COVID did backslide and rapidly. And I think one of the reasons for that, and it's a complex question, but one of the reasons is an old axiom in news is if it bleeds, it leads. So, you know, the focus is on bad news or negatively framed stories, just as a way of capturing our attention. It doesn't mean that if you think back to the 2 Daily Mail headlines, it's the same story. It's just a way of how you frame it. So I don't think that it's inherent, the backsliding is inherent, but I think that traditional media has a vested interest in trying to capture our attention with negatively framed stories.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Someone is also asking, how can we make this kind of news on the nightly news? How can we make it more mainstream?
Well, that's a very good question. I have the same question myself. But yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have an actual answer to that,
Well,
but
what is solutions journalism?
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It is a growing, like we were saying before, it is a growing, fast-moving space, and there are more and more journalists that are coming together and doing that. And I am actually seeing a little bit more, some clips and some dedicated small slots on TV to these kinds of stories. So it's happening, but it's just maybe not as fast as we wanted to.
And someone is asking about your writings and your podcast, and if there's a difference between the articles that you write and the podcasts that you host.
Oh yes. So basically what we do is we really want to give the voice or the platform to the person to tell their story. So both podcast and interview are interview based. So the writing that we do is really we're retranscribing their words, and the podcast is their voice, an audio format. So it is a bit like of a similar story. It's a little reframed differently for the articles so that it's more readable. But and we give a little bit of different information in both. But so each week we really focus on one inspire or hero, if you like, and really want to give them as much visibility as possible by telling their story through different mediums.
So the podcast is sort of a resume of the article is a resume of what you'll find in the podcast.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, originally we started out writing articles that reframed some of the things that some of the interviews, and now it's much more of a literal giving the person the mic.
Yeah, and also because I was having these interviews with people, and they were just so deeply touching, I really wanted more people to hear it, not just me.
Great, thank you. And then Akila asked that she just started doing more journalism and has been thinking about journalistic integrity. So what do you think about the role of journalistic integrity or what do you think the role is? Sorry, let me start that one again. What do you both think the role of journalistic integrity is in solutions journalism?
Well, there's different ways to take it, but I think the way we see it, solutions journalism movement, which is a relatively new movement, is about integrity, meaning that it's looking at a problem from not just the fact that there's a problem, but it's also looking at the context in which the problem is occurring. What are the factors that contribute to the problem? What are people doing in relationship to the problem? What are they trying to solve it? Have there been attempts to solve it? Have the attempts worked? And the solution story is going to report on all of that, not necessarily saying, yes, there's a solution, let's use it, but just saying that problems are complex, and here's some of what we've learned about the problem, and it gives a fuller picture of what's going on. So I think it's a very an integral approach in terms of integrity. Well, I don't know if that answers the question. But that's what comes up.
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking about is like there is a little bit of backlash to solutions journalism, thinking that solutions journalism is really just about being like, look how everything is fine. But it's really not that. It's like Kevin was just saying, it's really about giving the full picture. And there's also, reporting about the solutions. And if it doesn't work, it's important to report on that as well. But the point is to actually report not just about the problem and kind of grow the interest beyond just the issue, and also look at, like you were saying, the context, what's been tried, like what's going on. And so in that way, I feel like there's much more of a well-rounded vision on what the situation is. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of similar to what you just said, but yeah, it was making me think of that as well. I hope I answered that question.
But integrity in journalism is it's a fantastic subject, Today, I was just talking to somebody about access journalism. And access journalism is sort of a new trend. I guess going back, well, that took a different turn with in the context of war. And wire services wanting to get their journalists in contact with people who give them access to stories and images. And it really creates there's a whole load of questions that arise out of this trend toward access journalism in terms of what becomes important for the journalist is to have access to important people or people who have something to say, and they're going to privilege the access over some of the fundamentals of the story. So I mean, it's a integrity questions. It's a big space. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And we just got a new question in asking about strategies that you find helpful to make the solutions focused journalism content accessible to diverse audience. And specifically, do you find people turned away when you present solutions with science?
Well, I think that I mean, it's really about how you write as well. So I think there's something about just like reading the news and like depending on what news you read, like they will like apply to different audiences and different like educational levels, for example, or different backgrounds. And so, you know, I think that writing in a way that's very simple for people to understand so that, you know, the solution or the article is, or the podcast or whatever medium you use, the video is accessible is really, really important to grow the space in the first place. So yeah, that's my first thought on that. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's a growing space and a fast moving space. And I think what we're trying to do is just we're a small voice that we're trying to talk to our audience, but there's other actors out there, and we're really just all some of the people you put up on the slide at the end. I was also thinking of New Narrative out of Singapore, who's another who just they just recently started up 2 years at the same time as us, and we're really just about trying to help each other grow in the space and get this approach out there. And there's a lot of room for different approaches and reaching different audiences that we don't have the resources of a big media organization. So we focus on how we can frame our message, and we are hoping to see other organizations develop and address other audiences.
Great. Well, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Oh, yep. And we are at an hour now, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time. So I will put up here the social media information for the Inspire and their website, so you can keep up on the latest solutions journalism stories and meet some of these heroes. And of course, to share Bauseat's social media and our website if you're interested or know any students who would be interested in participating in the contest. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Em and Kevin, for that phenomenal presentation. I'm so excited. As I know, a lot of us are feeling fatigued by the news, so I'm really excited to dive into more solutions journalism focused and get some of my energy back.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you.